Hey everyone, and welcome back to the belated first episode of the SQL Squared podcast in 2026. It's been a little while. I took a 6-month break to travel and recharge, but I'm absolutely thrilled to be back here chatting about all things data development and the cool tech shaping our world. As always, to kick off the summer this year, we have another fantastic guest. I'm joined by Andrew Pruski, Field Solution Architect at Everpure and a fellow Welshman. So I'm glad to have you on the show. Andrew and I actually first crossed paths online at a local Manchester data meetup. If there are any local meetups going on in your areas, please keep an eye out for them. They're really, really good ways to learn and meet new people. And I finally had the pleasure of meeting Andrew in person at SQL Bits this past April, which was luckily in Newport. So I managed to go home and see family and stuff at the same time. Andrew, welcome to the show.
Thanks very much for having me. Fantastic to be here.
No, I'm glad to have you on as well. And we've got some interesting topics to cover that we haven't covered in previous episodes before, and making sure that your experience on SQL Server 2025 is shared with the world, and we can really see why people should upgrade. For the audiences out there, if you're watching on YouTube, please hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on the notifications so you don't miss our 2026 episodes. And remember, you can also catch all of our previous recordings over at podcast.sqlsquared.co.uk or on any of your favorite major podcast platforms. Jumping straight into it then, give us a bit of an overview about what makes the containerization of databases so special. What it provides to people using them, and maybe how it differs to how people will be used to using SQL Server on VMs and things like that.
Yes, I've been working with SQL Server containers for quite a while now. I did a session in Vilnius a couple of days ago for Dev Days 2026 talking about SQL Server and Kubernetes. One of my slides was an article that I published on SQL Server Central, and I checked the date and it was 2017 that I wrote that. So it's been a while. I was blown away the first time I saw SQL Server in a container. The ability to spin up a full-blown instance of SQL, well, full-blown in quotation marks there, in less than like a second is absolutely fantastic. And it gives us that ability to obviously deploy quickly, get up and running quickly. And you can do things like, on-demand deployments for SQL. Okay, I've got a CI/CD pipeline here. I need to test it. Got my data, spin up an instance, run my tests, blow it away. And that is the fundamental change when it comes to working with SQL Server in containers, is there's a separation here of compute and data.
Mm-hmm.
Back in the day with physical machines and virtual machines as well, we used to fixing our virtual machines, our physical machines. When things go wrong with them, we go and fix them, we patch them, we stroke them, we whisper sweet nothings to them. You don't do that with a container. You don't fix a container. If something goes wrong with a container, you blow it away, spin up a new one. And it's that fundamental separation of compute and data, because do we care about the compute really? No, we don't care. We blow it away, spin up as long as something can come along and access that data. It's just the data that we care about. So it's that fundamental change in thinking of it's not just one big monolith anymore. There's a separation. And that could do some really cool things as well, like patching. We don't patch a container. We blow the container away and spin up a new version. If something goes wrong, we've all been there where we've had to roll back a CU for SQL Server on Windows. We don't have to mess around there. We just blow the container away, redeploy with the container at the lower CU level and roll it back. Nice.
So how does that, I suppose, how does the use case in the real world for that differ to, say, using Azure SQL databases?
So for Azure SQL databases, you can go off and you can just deploy and get it going there. Depends on what you're doing really and what your use case is. The Azure SQL database can 100% be a great way of getting up and running with a version of SQL Server nice and quick. But say you're deploying on premises and you need something there. You're not going to deploy Azure SQL database. You're going to be running locally within your development environment, spinning up there. So it's all about, and I see this with Kubernetes as well, all these different options. We're kind of blessed these days when it comes to working with SQL Server, because back in the day it was just SQL Server on Windows. That's what you got. You can have a physical machine, and then you got virtual machines is what I'm looking for, the word I was looking for there. But now we have all these different other options for us.
There's
So
so
we've
many
still got
choices.
there's so many different choices, and it all depends on your requirements and your use cases. I always say start off with full-blown SQL Server, running a virtual machine, physical machine, and then actually analyze what you're doing. Okay, I'm running in the cloud. That opens up a whole different range of possibilities to me, not just running SQL Server on a VM. Can I use Azure SQL Database? Okay, maybe Azure SQL Database, for whatever reason, isn't going to fulfill what I need. All right, we've got Azure SQL Managed Instances. Okay, cool, we've got that as well. And then we've got containerization. We've got Azure Container Instance, and then we've got Kubernetes where we can deploy as well. So it's all about evaluating your requirements, what you need. Can you hit your SLAs? And I think more importantly, can you hit things like your recovery point objective within your recovery time objective?
Yeah, no, that's a really fair point. I personally have found a big improvement to my development workflow with using containerization in SQL. So you mentioned development and local environments just then, but having Docker on my machine and then being able to use SQL projects, for example, and deploy any changes I want to my local environment, populate it with mock information, test everything locally, all on my own machine, doesn't need to be deployed anywhere outside. And it just makes everything so much simpler. And things like dev, test, prod, infrastructure, DevOps practices to populate changes between various systems. That becomes a lot simpler the more you do on your local machine, as far as I'm concerned.
No more multiple instances installed on your laptop. No more binaries floating around from previous installs that you've tried to remove. Those days are gone. We can just spin up a new instance of SQL and get it. It's really good for the 2025 CTP testing. As part of the private preview, gone are the days where, okay, new CTP version is out, right? Build a VM, download the binaries, install SQL, blow away the old VM. No, we don't do that anymore. Pull down the new image, spin up a container, get it up and running, and then when you're finished, everything gets blown away. Nice and quick.
Yeah, easy upgrade paths too.
Yep.
Well, in terms of just chat about local development workflows, but like what streamline production deployments. What are and I'm trying to think of what I'm trying to say here. So from a production standpoint, especially when you've got containerization, I see that as the ability to not just quickly spin up and spin down instances when you need, but also have a large distributed suite of instances. And obviously that comes with, I'd imagine, a large overhead in terms of management. I haven't had to manage things like that in the past, and that's kind of where I see Kubernetes coming in. But again, I'm not a Kubernetes expert, so I was wondering, from a production standpoint, especially when you've got many instances, what sort of hurdles might people face when they're trying to onboard that sort of architecture, and what advice can you give them to make that a success?
So it's talking about deploying a large amount of SQL instances into, say, Kubernetes clusters.
Yeah.
It's visibility and monitoring.
Okay.
100%. The first thing I tell people when they're looking, so let's say they've decided to deploy SQL Server to a Kubernetes cluster. Talk about the three main responsibilities of a DBA. And these are controversial because there's so the first one is availability. If you ask a DBA what their main primary job is, they'll say backups, but it isn't. It's availability, because if the SQL instance isn't up and running,
well, that was the point.
We might as well all go home. So the first thing you need to consider there is, all right, we're deploying in there, and how are we going to keep things up and running? Now, up until recently, there are companies out there that'll do this for you, but we couldn't deploy availability groups for SQL Server on Kubernetes. There was an operator in the 2019 CTP release, but it never made it into the RTM release. It was one of those things that they decided, they're under a pressure timeline to get the version out, and things get dropped. And
Just for the audience, while you're talking about it, sorry to jump in. Just for the audience,
of course.
Could you explain those acronyms that you're using, just so everyone's on the same page?
Community Technical Preview is the CTP release,
Mhm.
and RTM is it released to market or is it released to main? It's basically the
I think
released
it's
version.
market, yeah.
Market, okay, cool,
Right.
yeah. Because someone said something else the other day. I was like, really? Have I been getting that wrong? But it's the GA release version, generally
Yeah.
accepted release
Yeah,
version.
yeah.
Is GA generally accepted? Whatever.
General availability. I
General
think it might be.
availability.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, it's the version that gets released once it's come out of public preview.
Yeah. Okay. Great.
Too many acronyms. Sorry.
Yeah. No, it's all good. It's all good.
General availability. So it never made it out into the 2019 release. So we had to rely, if you're deploying to Kubernetes, you had to rely on the native Kubernetes functions to keep your
Mhm.
SQL Server available. So things like tolerations, making sure things fail over when nodes died and things like that. It's 100% doable. But now there is a SQL Server operator out there built by a colleague of mine. It's completely open source. It's on GitHub. You can go and test it and have a look at it. So we can get AGs out there. So we have the ability to use availability groups in Kubernetes and keep our databases up.
Share a link with me, and I'll put it in the footnotes of the
100%.
podcast.
And then of course there's backups. You've got your backups. When things inevitably go wrong, because they go wrong in every environment, you need to be able to hit your RTO and RPOs. And of course, it's just another platform for you to be running SQL Server. So still taking native backups, but there are things out there that you can help with things like snapshots. You've got volume snapshotting available on Kubernetes. Highly recommend crash consistent snapshots for SQL on Kubernetes, as long as the underlying storage provider supports them. Just be aware that crash consistent snapshots do not replace native backups. I've heard people say they can. They're telling porky pies. Crash consistent 100% cannot. They're there to support you. They give you just another way of recovering data if you need to.
Just in case things go wrong, I'm guessing.
Just in case.
Yeah.
It's really weird. I don't know why this is stuck. You get things stuck in your head and you always remember them and you can't really work out why. I don't know if you've ever seen G.I. Jane.
No, I've heard of it, but I haven't seen it.
There's a scene in it where she's being trained and there's an instructor telling her about her. There's a phrase he uses. He goes, 2 is 1, 1 is none. And for some reason, throughout my DBA career, that has always stuck with me. Okay, 2 types of backing up my database is one type of backing up my database is none. And
Fair.
I know it's completely random and a little bit weird, I will admit, but it's always kind of stuck with me. I've got my native backups. I'm going to support those backups with my crash consistent snapshots.
Well, they always say that you should follow the 3-2-1 rule, don't
yes.
they? It's
three
copies of your data in 2 different locations, one being offsite. Yeah.
I've just come up with a really weirder way of saying it.
Gonna go to G.I. Jane instead.
Yes. So we have that. And then we have performance, where we do our testing, and there's a whole bunch of tools for SQL Server performance to validate that we're running as we are.
Yeah.
And then, the big overriding one that I haven't mentioned is, of course, security. But we'll leave that to the side now, because of course you have to secure your data. And after that, after you get all of that sorted, then you have your monitoring. You need to have good insights available into what's happening in your SQL instances at all times. And there's so many monitoring tools out there for SQL.
Oh yeah.
But you need to have in-depth, detailed monitoring and alerting for everything that could go wrong, because inevitably things will happen that you need to respond to. And
I suppose when you've got more instances as well, that issue scales massively.
Skyrockets, yes.
Yeah.
So of course you need to have a monitoring solution that scales with your environment, because we're talking a lot of little instances here, really, when we're talking about Kubernetes. One of the use cases I've seen for Kubernetes, and I thought it was a really, really good one, it wasn't production, it was a corporate environment where, have you ever installed an application where it said, do you want to install an instance of SQL Express? And DBAs hate this because you end up with these little instances of SQL Server popping up all the way throughout your environment. And, SQL Express doesn't have an agent. There's no native backups. Number of times someone's come and talked to me going, oh, we need to restore this database. And I've gone, what on earth is that SQL instance? I've never heard of that. Okay, let's have a look. Please let someone set up some scheduled tasks to back this up. So what one chap did at his environment, had a Kubernetes cluster. He consolidated all of those SQL instances into a Kubernetes cluster and was running them there. because SQL Express, they're tiny databases. They don't have any high availability solutions, so he was using Kubernetes to do that. And then he was using Kubernetes scheduled jobs to back everything up, all in a centralized location with monitoring over it that he could control. I thought that was a great use case for this.
Yeah, it is great. I mean, I've never really considered using SQL Server Express. I've sort of known of it, but
That's
never
just when you
really.
install certain applications. You're running through it. And you go, would you like to install SQL Express? And it's just yes, thank you, and off
Yeah,
it
it
goes.
just goes. Yeah, no,
Yeah.
yeah.
So no, that was a really good use case for it. And he said, look, I've got everything there, got my monitoring over it, completely controlled, secure, secure environment. I'm backing it up. I've got the, it's corporate, so if things go down for a few minutes, it doesn't really matter. If a node goes down, Kubernetes will move everything across, bring everything back up for me. I've got my jobs there to run my backups. I'm snapshotting the volumes that I'm backing up to and replicating them out of the environment. So everything's there for me. I don't have to worry about it. When teams come to me and say we need a new version, nice and simple, boom, one manifest, off we go, up and running.
That sounds really powerful. Something I need to look into. I've been looking into a lot of other database technologies recently, mainly built around Postgres, just to expand my knowledge in the industry, because I know, start to go to a lot of conferences and talks around the UK in the modern day, and there's always a couple of talks on Postgres and some things that can.
It's been around for ages, but it's very much on the rise these days. I've seen a lot
like
more
Linux.
interest in it. Yeah.
No, yeah, there is a lot of interest, and there's a lot of third-party things as well. Like I've been using Superbase recently, which is extremely powerful platform. Okay, really cool. Good for web development and management of data for accounts and things like that.
Oh, nice.
Application related.
That was one of the nice things about SQL Server in containers that got me in. They used to be SQL Server in Windows containers. Microsoft sort of went, all right, we tried it. We really did give it a go, but no, we're not going to do it anymore. After SQL Server 2019, they ditched Windows containers. And everyone listening to this, yes, you still can run SQL Server in Windows containers. Don't do it. It's a nightmare.
Not recommended.
No, it's the same in Kubernetes. You can have Windows node pools, say in Kubernetes and AKS. Again, just don't mess around with it. They just weren't particularly great. Linux is where you want to be running your containers, and Microsoft have said we won't support SQL Server in Windows containers anymore. Go for the Linux stuff. However, that does require a little bit of Linux knowledge if you want to start delving into it. And that's how I got into learning Linux was, okay, all right, I like this technology. I like the SQL Server and container stuff. Let's go and have a look at SQL Server on Linux itself. And oh boy, talk about a rabbit hole when you go down there.
Well, we won't touch on that stuff. I think we can. We'll end up chatting for the next 2 hours.
Yeah, but no, it's just another platform where you can run SQL Server, and it's nice, as you say, to broaden your horizons. And I got Linux, and then I started looking at Postgres as well. Now my Postgres is terrible. I could just about get up and running with it. I've set up some replication for it in the past, but yeah, it's on my list. When I go to SQL conferences and there's a Postgres session there, I'm definitely diving into that and been attending.
A lot of the Postgres stuff that I've been dealing with that I found really useful is using ORMs on top of it. I can't remember what ORM stands for.
Object Relational Mapper?
Maybe. But it's basically being able to or script out all of your Postgres or SQL structures and relationships in things like TypeScript. And then that will map and convert that on a migration in a migration format to Postgres and push that in. So you don't really need to know a lot of the things that sit behind Postgres. These ORM solutions will do that for you, and the majority of them are just free open source projects. So I've just found that very, very useful when developing web applications. If I'm already developing in TypeScript, having a backend where I can develop all of that in TypeScript and have all the unit tests and everything continue to run off it, massively helps. But that's going a little bit off topic.
The only thing I will ever say with ORMs is I've seen good ones and I've seen bad ones. We use one in, this is many years ago. So everyone listening, I don't have anything against ORMs. My general bit of advice is have a look at the SQL that they're generating in the background.
Yeah.
I've seen one, and it was fixed in a later version, but when it went to update a column in a table, it would also update all the other columns in the table to the same value. Lots of fun trying to
Oh,
troubleshoot
wow.
execution plans with that. So yeah, ORMs are great because yes, they abstract away the SQL instance, and you can just write in your code. But they're also terrible because they abstract away the SQL instance from it. So you get good ones and get bad ones.
Yeah, everyone keep that in mind. But moving on from that, we're talking about modern technologies, modern ways of deploying, managing clusters of instances. SQL Server 2025. SQL Server 2025 came out recently, and from what I've seen online, I don't think there's many people in the industry that actually understand the leap that SQL Server 2025 takes over previous versions. So I wonder if you could just give a bit of a high-level overview of what you've seen SQL Server 2025 offer to the general data developer.
Okay, so there's two tracks here we can talk about with SQL Server 2025, and that is the fact that it is now called the AI Ready Database, or have I just made it? It's got AI features in there.
Yeah.
And I do two talks at the moment. I do an AI-powered search in SQL Server 2025 using the new functionality there. And there's another session I do, which I did at SQL Bits, which is 10 new features in SQL Server 2025 that aren't AI. So there's a whole great alert. So I'll do the aren't AI stuff. There's a whole bunch of query optimized stuff in there. Improvements to SB execute SQL. So being able to cache plans and reuse them like a store procedure or function or trigger. That's really cool. So check that out. There's the ability. There's the backup compression. We now have the ability to a new compression algorithm, ZSTD, which gives you different levels of compression for your backup. So instead of just switching it on and off, you now have low, medium, and high. So us DBAs are control freaks. We like that more granular control. We now can say balance out how much we want to compress our backup by say CPU consumed on the host server when we're running our backups.
Okay, so what would be the benefits of having something on low or having something on high?
So on high, you get a smaller backup, but you're going to use more CPU on the host. Low, less CPU consumed for compressing your backup, but the backup will be larger. So it all depends on exactly, it depends, basically.
Yeah, what your
it's
use
the same
cases
thing
are.
with everything for your use case. To see if your server's big and chunky enough that it can handle it, great. If you are concerned about CPU usage on it when you're running your backups, then you stick it on low. You still get a compressed backup, but it's not as compressed as it would be. So we just have the ability to choose, which is always good, I believe. Things like what other features have we got in there? I'm trying to remember the optimized locking. That's the one I was trying to.
That was something that stood out from your talk when you did it.
It's called lock after qualification. So the normal way of locking is we have a predicate in our SQL statement. That'll come and we'll check that. We'll lock the table, check, and then release the lock.
Yep.
With lock after qualification, what it does is it actually looks at the table, looks at the row, sees if that row satisfies the predicate of our query, so where ID equals 3. If it doesn't, it moves on. If it does, it then takes the lock on the table. So all about reducing the amount of locks that are going to be taken. Sorry, reduce. I'm getting my term. What I mean is row, not table. Row. But it's a really interesting feature that I think people should go and check out. So there's a whole bunch of stuff in there. For me, there's the ability to put tempdb on tempfs in SQL Server on Linux. We can run basically tempdb in memory. It's kind of cool. Loads of stuff in there that we can do. So yes. Oh, sorry.
I was going to say, do you have have you written it up? Do you have a blog post? Is there anything to share that I can kind of pass out to the audience?
I have my GitHub repo with all the demo code in that I did for my session with my slides. So we can put that in the notes 100%.
Yeah, great. Will do.
And these are all designed for you build a database, insert some test data, so you don't need any prerequisites other than an instance of SQL Server 2025. So you go test that out. trying to think. So let's move on to those are all the features there. So Microsoft's been marketing all the AI features a lot, but there's so much other stuff in that release that I think people should go and check out. But let's talk about the AI stuff. The AI stuff is pretty cool. It's all the vector support. So it's the support for vector data types, and then being able to do vector searches on there. So it's semantic similarity searching. I'm kind of doubling it. So it's just semantic capabilities within them. So to be able to take a set of data, generate some embeddings from it, and then run a query over that data to say, I don't know, I do one. My session is all about searching for burrito restaurants in Ireland based on review data, or Google review data. And I sort of talk about, right, when I first started, I was taking restaurant metadata, generating embeddings from that. So restaurant metadata is, name, number of reviews, overall stars, and locations. And I was generating embeddings from that and saying, show me a restaurant that has over 4 stars. And I sort of caught myself because SQL's been able to do this for years, so select from table where stars greater than 4.
Yeah.
So I'm just like, come on now, Andrew, think about what you're doing here. And so what I did was I went and took Google review data and generated embeddings from that, and then did the session saying, all right, give me a restaurant with a cozy atmosphere. Give me a restaurant that is family friendly. And from the review data, the embeddings from that, you take the query, generate an embedding, and then compare that. And it spits out a load of stuff. And in the session we go and, it shows the results, and then we actually have a look at the data. A really good one is show me a restaurant that has authentic Mexican food. And from the review data, you guys are like, there's one review that says it feels like I was at home and all this type of stuff. So it's really interesting, really powerful stuff that we can do here, being able to pull this stuff out. Because this isn't financial data, this isn't medical data, this is just show me a restaurant. So we get a little bit of fuzziness there, but it's still bringing back relevant information for us.
No, it's really good. I will be working with a lot of that stuff throughout this year myself, and I'm really looking forward to it. I've seen some really powerful things. I've had a play around with it myself, but not to the same extent that you've said there. But yeah, I remember seeing a talk, potentially a future guest on the podcast as well, at SQL Bits. One of the engineers at Microsoft did one where he loaded a load of information about FPL, Fantasy Premier League, and basically was able to do semantic search in a very simple web app that he'd vibe coded to look at that data and give him recommendations on who to pick with whatever budget he's got based on past information and records and statistics that they'd had against certain teams and stuff like that. It was quite.
That's a perfect use case. Yeah,
it is a perfect use case. I have a friend who did something similar this year. It wasn't using AI stuff. He basically loaded all of the FPL data into, I think he used DuckDB because he was wanting to learn it.
Okay, cool.
Then loaded it into DuckDB and then built like a Python middleware and front end on it to do a very similar thing, to provide recommendations of who to, what to use, who to put in your teams in certain weeks. And he's finished top of the league, top of all of his leagues. He's won them all pretty much because of that application. I've done very, very poorly in FPL this year. Lost more money than I'd like, and I think I'll be trying that out next year. Definitely do my own project. But yeah, there's a lot of AI stuff that I'm excited to use within SQL Server 2025, and I suppose having all of those embedding and vector data types and the kind of the AI engine, I suppose, that sits in the background. The reducing the need for companies or even like projects and teams to go and use another data solution for those embeddings and for those vector mappings is a very, very big win. Bringing it all into one place.
no, we don't have to go and learn another technology to get this functionality. It's all baked into SQL. We know SQL. We can use SQL. We can use its existing features. So things like security, things like high availability, disaster recovery, all baked in for our data. Now, there are concerns. Like when I first heard about this, there's a new stored procedure that it basically enables SP execute external endpoint, whatever it's called. But it's basically what is the background thing when you use the new generate embeddings function. It goes
Because you
and
have to go
sends
to
your
a model, don't you, in like AI Foundry or
yes.
whatever to get it.
You have to connect to you have to set up a connection to a model within SQL, and then you generate the embeddings by taking your data from your database to somewhere, and then it spits back your embeddings. And that was the debate that I saw on LinkedIn was, okay, this is a terrible idea. We are setting up people for basically data breaches. And I kind of agree with it, and I don't agree with it. Yes, it could potentially be a massive security hole, but it's all about how you use it. Like none of my production SQL instances ever had internet access. It just wasn't a thing. So would I open up my production boxes to hit these models? Probably not. Would I have a staging area where I'd send data that would be sent out after being validated to make sure nothing sensitive was being sent out? Yeah, 100%. I'd go that way. It's all about,
That's fair.
It's just a feature. How you use that feature then depends on whether or not you're causing issues. And that was the debate I saw through my peers on LinkedIn. One was like, "This is great, let's do this." And the other one was like, "Absolutely not in a million years." Like, come on, chaps. There is some middle ground here for this feature.
But in terms of networking and security, there's a way of keeping all of that in an internal network, isn't there?
Yes, 100%.
Yeah.
So I think you need to watch it, but I think by default, because my demo, I was setting up a model in Azure Foundry and had my SQL instance running as a VM in a resource group up in Azure. And I was having a look at it going, no, wait, this isn't going directly to the model. It's going out through the internet and down. So yeah, you need to just, it's not where your data ends up. It's also how it gets there.
How it travels there.
Yes.
Yeah. 100%. In terms of, well, your experience using this stuff, doing proof of concepts, what have you found a good model in AI Foundry to use for this embedding?
No, for the embeddings, I'm using the. You're going to ask me for the name of it, aren't you?
Mostly for myself.
Text3 embedding small off the top of my head.
Okay.
There are dedicated models out there for generating embeddings, and I'm using the Text3 small embeddings, Text3 embedding small, one of those out there.
I feel like Google came out with one recently. It was like Google Embeddings 2 or something like that.
Okay.
Built off Gemini that I've been wanting to use. I'm a big Google fan. I love everything Google. But yeah, which is why I got all the Google Workspace stuff and Google Phone, Google Watch, everything. I'm like the Apple fanboy of the Google ecosystem. But yeah, I absolutely love all of the Gemini stuff. And just on the topic of AI, without going too far off track, I've started to try and use anti-gravity recently as well, to do a bit of development in, and creation of agents and management of development and things like that.
I'm still very much a starter on this. I've hooked up ChatGPT's version of Codex to Visual Studio Code and had sort of pointed at a few of my GitHub repos and said, right, find any potential issues here. And it comes back with some really, really cool stuff. I'm very, very hesitant to sort of point to an MCP server, say a production instance, and say, right, let's do this. I think that could potentially. Well, you see it all the time.
I always do on the test instances. Yeah,
we've all seen those articles online of it decided to drop our production database because I wanted it to do a change, and it decided the most efficient way of doing so was to rebuild from scratch and all that jazz. Yeah. So I'm still optimistically cautious about it.
Yeah, you've got to be careful.
You just got to be really careful with what you're doing. But for local development work, it's great. Kind of takes the fun out of coding, though, if it's just going to build everything for you. I kind of like getting stuck
the dopamine hit.
Yeah. But it's we can build stuff out now. We can. I like to use it as a sounding board. I've built this. What's wrong with it? That type of stuff.
All right then. A bit of a change to a fun section. We always like to put these in the episodes. doing something I have done before, but I feel like you'll have some interesting stories. To development horror stories. We love hearing these. Love seeing these. You always get to talk about horror stories at conferences to give people a good laugh. So before we go on to our final topic, we've all been there. Issues that we've created or issues that somebody else has created that we've had to fix. You got any examples of a good horror story?
I've got two. One that happened to a colleague of mine, and then one I did myself. I'll do the one I did myself first, because this was we were doing a migration. We were migrating a load of SQL instances just within the. We were migrating them, doing a domain migration. A company I worked for the last 20 years, the production environment had like different child domains pop up, parallel domains, and all these SQL instances running here, there, and everywhere. And they wanted to consolidate them all into a new domain, just purely for management. And we were migrating, and they were all in AGs and with distributed availability groups as well. So I was creating the one AG for probably the most primary SQL instances that we had. And don't ask. Well, the reason this happened. The reason this happened was the sysadmins insisted that the new servers and the old servers have the same name, just a different FQDN, fully qualified domain.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
Now, pretty much everyone can work out what happened, but I was building out the AG, and my developers had assured me that all of the applications were using fully qualified domain names. So I built the AG and created the listener for that AG. And the second I created that listener, it came online, I got an alert popping up saying the whole thing, everything had gone down. Because the second I created that listener, all the apps that you weren't using a fully qualified domain name went straight to the news listener. And of course, no databases, nothing. So everything just started throwing errors like there was no tomorrow. And so, okay, right, easy fix, drop the listener. Problem then is you have to wait for DNS to sort itself out. And we have to go through all the application servers and refresh DNS to make sure that they pointed back at the old one. But that was my taking the entire company down for around 20 minutes by building an AG in the new environment. It's just one of those things that, when you do something and you see an alert, and then you go,
and you just know exactly what it is.
That cannot be a coincidence. That is definitely me.
I know.
That horrible sinking feeling.
I've had a same thing happen with somebody else before, where we had a SQL server that sat behind one of our financial systems. And the financial system is really legacy, and it reads from the SQL Server in a very similar way, using the local names rather than the fully qualified names. And there's not much we could do to change that. So we always really, really struggle to have test instances for that server, like to literally the point where, if we bring up a test instance or some sort of a copy with the same name on the network, we know everything's going to go down. So we've got to be so careful, make sure that we're taking every step necessary to try and create something that's either completely off the network, that we can look at locally on a VM, or try and change those names and the processes. But then coding on that system and then converting everything over is then a pain in the ass, because you got to change a lot of code that could make mistakes and blah blah. But yeah, I feel that pain.
It's just that sinking feeling. You're like, right, okay. The worst part of that was sort of sitting in the review afterwards going, right, Andrew, what could you have done different? And me going, well, nothing. I mean, we need to build this system. And I was like, oh, could you have tested it? It's like, well, I could have built a listener with a different name, but then I just, when it comes to deployment time, we'd have to blow that away and build up a new one. So no, not really. It's just one of those where I had to hold my hands up and go, yeah, okay, that was my fault.
Sometimes you got to do that.
Yeah. And I always say to new DBAs, look, at some point, it's just it's the nature of the job. You're going to do something and cause a problem. Do not try and hide it. All you're going to do is make things worse. hold your hands up immediately and go, right, this has happened. And hopefully, and I would expect, any professionals around you, like, we don't point fingers here. We do a triage afterwards and say, right, what could we have done differently? What can we put in place to prevent this from happening again? But thankfully, I've never worked in a place where I go, there's finger pointing and, you and actually having to go. I mean, okay, if I'd done the same thing again in a few days, and yeah, 100%, then there could be finger pointing. It's like, come on now, you haven't learned from what you did the previous experience. I've been lucky in the fact that I've worked with companies that are like, right, okay, we'll triage the event, we'll see what happened, and we'll learn from the mistakes that were made. So,
it's definitely the right way to be.
100%. The other one I wanted to talk about was this is this is my first job when I moved to Dublin. I was working with a DBA, one of the best DBAs I've worked with. And one afternoon we were sitting there, and a developer came to him and said, "Look, can you run this update statement in the production environment?" And let's gloss over the fact he was doing ad hoc updates to production. This company was just transitioning out of like a startup kind of environment into a more established company. So we were still doing things like this. So he took the update, ran it in production, and then made or I could just describe as like a squeaking noise. This was like, I instantly sitting next to him going, "All right, what have you done?" And he was like, he'd copied it, but he'd missed the where clause. So instead of updating that one row in the table, he updated every single row in the table with the value that.
I've done that.
Oh yeah, we've all done that. Come on.
When
I do my chaos engineering session, I tell this story, and the first thing I say is like, "Who here has ever run an update statement in production and messed up or missed their where clause?" And it's like, come on,
everyone puts their hands up.
Be honest.
What are the big protections? I don't know if you use SQL Prompt, the Redgate product.
Yep, it'll. One of the outcomes of this, we install something called SQL Server Management Toolbox, which I think it'll analyze your scripts before you execute them and say, the problem with that is you get blasé with it, and you're like, yeah, I know what I'm doing, and just hit OK, and then, oh no.
I have never. There's the SQL Prompt. If you run an update statement without a where clause, doesn't matter about the script that you've highlighted. It's like without a where clause, it'll pop up and say, "Are you sure you want to do this?" And then there's a little checkbox to say, "Don't show me again." I say, never click that checkbox ever, because yes, you may run update statements without where clauses. Fine, if you're just doing something small, and it might become annoying, but that one time where it will save your ass, it will save your ass. Like I've had it save me a couple of times.
I bet we installed a similar feature of SQL Server Management Toolbox I think it's Management Toolbox it was called, just to basically give us that functionality as well, just to kind of block that. That resulted in having to do a side-by-side. We were lucky the database was only about 300 gig. So we had our scripts ready to go, where I kicked off a restore, because we knew exactly when he ran the script. So we rolled it forward to just before he ran it, and it was more or less a static table. It was a discount table. So the impact was that a 15% discount was applied to every single transaction that company did, whilst we were getting this fixed. It wasn't too bad. It was okay. It took about 20 minutes. We did a side-by-side restore. Whilst I was restoring the database, rolling through the logs, he just wrote the simple update to grab the existing the data from the table there and put it back. Interestingly, this is where snapshots could have come in handy. When I was talking about snapshots earlier, and people say you can't replace them. I was saying you can't replace them with you can't replace your native backups with the snapshots. This is a perfect use case for them. Static table, we could have just brought the database back up from a snapshot, grabbed the data that it was, pulled it back in a fraction of the time that it took me to do the full diff transaction log restores. Okay, we were lucky. It was only like a 300 gig database, so it didn't take that long to restore. If that database had been, databases these days, I've seen some monsters.
Don't know about huge.
But we're talking hundreds of terabytes. I'm so glad I'm not an Oracle DBA. Some of those Oracle databases out there are terrifying in scale. But hundreds of terabytes, and trying it wasn't a feature of 2025. It was in 2022, and that's the T-SQL snapshot backup. That's the ability to take application consistent snapshots within SQL. So instead of having to go through VSS now, where it goes off, stuns the
Mhm.
disks, you take your snapshot, and then releases the stun, you can do it all through T-SQL. So you say suspend the snapshot backup on, that freezes write IO only. You take your snapshot, and then you take what's known as a metadata only back. And that's just like writing a small little file, and that releases the IO.
Mhm.
So you can take your application consistent snapshots through within SQL. And the clue's in the name. Those can replace your native backups, native full backups, because they're snapshot backups. The thing with those is, on the DBA still get twitchy with them, is, yeah, okay, there is a stun there, quiesce, freeze of that write IO.
Mhm.
But it's very small because we're now doing it all through SQL Server. So uh, it's something if you are out there and you've got a gigantic SQL database that you're struggling to hit the recovery point objective within your recovery time objective, that's a feature that I'd highly recommend people check out. It's my favorite feature of SQL Server 2022. But anyway, I work for a company that sells storage. So.
Yeah, you want things to take up as much space as possible.
Nah.
No, they were a couple of good examples, and I think more importantly, they are examples that people can learn from without doing it themselves. So that's good. Make sure to mention in my posts about this episode that we've got some very DBA centric tips and tricks here
Yes.
that they need to follow up on.
So I was trying to think of any other disasters. Oh, I remember being this is many years ago, working for a company just outside Bristol. I was having a
Uh-huh.
meal on we didn't have on call, so my boss called me when I just sat down for a meal on a Saturday night, which made me curious. I was like, "Hello," and he was like, "I don't want you to panic." And I'm like, "Hmm."
Now I'm panicking.
Yeah, we had everything was on premises. So he said, "Yeah, the power has just gone on site." I'm like, "Haha, all right. Well, obviously we had a generator kick in." He's like, "Yes, that failed as well." It's like, wonderful. Okay, so um, had to say to my girlfriend at the time, I was like, "Well, we're not having a meal. I have to go to work." I had to go and check. Thankfully, we got everything came back. Everything came back online. But yeah, I had to spend the next few hours going through everything, making sure that basically these servers had just had their power yanked away from them, and we had to go through and run check DB everywhere to make sure
Yeah.
that nothing had been corrupted. A few databases had, but touch wood, thank my lucky stars, all that jazz. It was only non-clustered index corruption. So rebuild the indexes and you're fine. So
Yeah.
got away with that one. But that was another sinking feeling of, oh, my next week's about to be very busy.
Probably one of the worst weeks in history as well.
Oh,
Having to do all of that. I can't imagine doing that.
ah,
I'd hate it.
it's one of those things where, okay, any DBA, we plan for this type of stuff. You have your scripts ready to go. There's things out there now. I mean, DBA tools didn't exist at the time, but that's available. So that'll generate and restore your databases for you. You
Mhm.
can point out your backup locations. It'll work out which ones you need and then run through the restore. So it's an excellent tool to have. But yeah, it's not something any DBA wants to hear. It's power's out.
Absolutely not.
And of course, it was a small little company. Did we have a DR site? Of course we didn't.
No, you always get into those situations where, depending on how much budget and scope you've got for these sorts of things, it doesn't matter how important systems are. Having multiple instances of them available, or large conclusive backups being stored, they can end up cost a lot of money. Especially based on how much storage they take.
I always say the amount of I've spent far longer than I care to think about talking to management about DR sites, because management hate it because it costs a lot of money and hopefully you'll never have to use it.
But
You
when
sort of
you
have
need
to,
it,
yeah. It's
yeah, you thank your lucky stars when when you do
so
need to recover from a disaster.
it's the difference between company continuing on as normal or the company folding, basically.
Yeah.
And it's the same where we were on premises. But it's the same thing with private data centers and the cloud. Don't rely on, I had a company and I'd left about 4 months afterwards. Their primary data center had a 4-hour power outage, everything
Oof.
down. No DR plan in place. So that company was out for 4 hours. And it was longer than 4 hours because when they came up with things like all their firewall rules were messed up and whatnot, so they had to spend a lot of time triaging that. Whereas if you have a DR plan, you can just enact that, press the big red button, fade everything over, and you're up and running.
We've had a couple of instances recently actually on Azure. We started using function apps a lot more for just simple API setups, things like that need to talk and authenticate with data stores and provide information to apps or integrations. And we had it was back in end of Feb. I'd just been away, so one of the reasons I've taken a break from doing the podcast is because I went on a month-long trip around Europe
Very
in
nice.
Feb, and it was the day I got back home.
Yeah.
I got a call the day we got back home, the day before I was supposed to go back to work. Got a call, and they said, "Yeah, like one of these integrations you've built using function apps, like it's just not working anymore. Like, and we can't deploy to it or anything. We've had a function app outage, but everything's come back online, and this one doesn't seem to be working." And I logged on and I went and looked at it. None of the code was on the function app instance. It was empty. It had just gone. Like all of the variables, the environment variables and everything was still there. But the code, the actual hosted app, wiped. Totally gone. So I was like, the
What?
fix was
Okay.
easy because I just had to deploy. I just deployed the code again. But yeah, it was. I had no idea why. We got in touch with Microsoft and they didn't really give us a useful answer. But it had just disappeared. The whole thing. No functions available, no code on it whatsoever, just blank.
But the fact that they contacted you to triage that, whereas they obviously hadn't looked at it in any way, shape, or form.
No,
Well,
no.
yeah, love that.
I think they
Maritime
just
have said,
panicked. It
yeah,
was just like, oh shit, there's nothing even showing here. What do we do? But it was just a simple, just redeploy it, and and you'll be all right because we had all the infrastructure as code and things set up for it. So it ended up being okay. We had downtime of a couple of hours, but just an internal integration, so not a major problem. But yeah, so we've had some weird things in Azure so far in 2026. I think they're making a lot of changes in the background.
mm.
And yeah, some things are going wrong, especially on the Fabric side. We've leaned heavily into Fabric, and there's
It's
been
not
some
something
weirdness.
I've really touched. I know Microsoft are all over Fabric.
Mm.
I've always been more of a, I work for Everpure, so we're talking SQL Server on premises a lot. We do cloud integrations and things like that, but when I'm talking to customers, it's all vanilla SQL Server, really. So no, I haven't had a chance. It's on the big long list of things I have to go and investigate and
Yeah,
get my head around.
just out of interest on-prem, I know we've talked about the AI features of SQL Server 2025, and I know there's loads of companies, corporations, enterprises buying into AI services, and some of them find that a lot of the cloud functionality or the costs are too much that are ongoing. And so I have heard quite a lot of stories of some companies going back to certain on-prem solutions. Like, have you seen a growth over the last few years in on-prem?
I love this question because it's just confirmation bias on my part when I answer it, because I talk to customers who are running SQL Server on premises. So if you talk to me, I'll say, hey, yes, on-prem isn't dying, it's actually growing. Whereas if you talk to someone who's a cloud specialist, they'll tell you everyone's migrating to the cloud. I think that there's a big, huge push, yes, for everyone to migrate to the cloud because of the benefits that it gives you. I have heard of people migrating back because of costs. And I think we're going to end up in a situation now where people are in a hybrid scenario, where they are running stuff on premises in private data centers, and they have some sort of infrastructure running in a multi-cloud environment. It's not just Azure, but AWS as well.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of what I'm seeing at the moment, is they're coming up with, like, we're running some stuff on premises um, for pick a reason: data security, performance, location. We need to keep data within a certain location, which is prevalent over in Europe. And then we're running stuff in the cloud, and it might be our primary environment, it might be a disaster recovery environment, it might be something that we want to switch into at some point to run there, because we might be just running dev up there. So I think you're asking someone who primarily works with on-premise customers, so take it with a pinch of salt, but that's where I think we'll end up, is most places will have some sort of hybrid environment.
Yeah, that's fair. I agree. That's how I see things going too. And I think joining a new company in August, and I'm pretty sure they're in a similar boat. They've chosen to do a lot of their SQL Server bits on-prem with some hybrid migrations to the cloud in terms of integrations and stuff like that, and certain features. But anyway, moving on to a final topic of the day. We'll probably spend 10 or so minutes here. Something that in our previous chat, you were quite passionate about, embracing chaos engineering.
Yes.
Now, I want to just for the audience out there, and for me in general, can you give us a bit of an overview about what you see chaos engineering being?
Yes. So it is the worst titled discipline out there, purely for the fact that if you go to your boss and say, "Hey, I'm going to be a chaos engineer," they're going to go, "What? You're bringing chaos into our environment?" No, absolutely not. So it's chaos engineering, but what it really is, in my opinion, is it's resiliency testing. So we spend ages building out these high availability solutions, disaster recovery strategies, backup and restore strategies. Chaos engineering really is all about testing those.
Mm-hmm.
So the definition, and there's a principles.org, principlesofchaos.org website, which is a great resource for chaos engineering, but it defines it
Make
as
sure to link that.
the discipline of experimenting upon systems to see how they react when they encounter failure. So what that basically means is we are introducing tests into our environment to see how our systems react when they encounter a failure. Do they react the way we expect them to? And if they do, then great, we've built up confidence in our system. If they don't, we need to go and work out why. And then obviously maybe there's a misconfiguration out in our environment. A great example of this is, say we've got an availability group. We've got a primary and a secondary, just for HA within our environment. And I do a session on this and say, right, what's the first thing any DBA does once they've built the AG? They've built the AG, they've seeded their databases, it's up and running. First thing we do, we fail it over. We say, alter availability group, fail over. We fail it over to the secondary, let it run there, have a look at it, and then we fail it back to the primary. Wonderful stuff. That is not how an AG fails in the wild. That's a really sanitized way of testing AG failover. And what I do in the demo is I turn the primary node off, switch off the node, and see what happens. The AG fails over. Great. Bring the node back up, fail it back. When I do the second one, it doesn't fail back. It just it waits for that the new primary to come back online, and the AG stays there. The reason for that is I'm using the default settings on the clustered service. I don't change them. And it's by default for a 2-node cluster, a clustered service can fail over once in 6 hours. So it's in the cluster settings. If you go into Windows Cluster Management and have a look at it, it's n+1 for the number of nodes. It's n-1, sorry, because it's 1 every 6 hours. And so the first time it fails over fine, because that's our one failure. But the second time you try it, it's within those 6 hours. You'll see in the cluster error logs, it'll say cluster service has exceeded its number of failures within the specified threshold. It will not fail over. And that doesn't pop up when you just do the T-SQL failures. So there's a misconfiguration. There's a misconfiguration there. So we've designed an experiment test real life scenarios in our environment to see how it's actually going to fail. And it's popped up with, oh, okay, there's a setting there that we need to change, and we need to go investigate what would be the correct settings. How many failures do we want this AG to actually experience within a certain threshold for it? I mean, I know this isn't a golden standard rule for everyone, but in my last environment, we went with 2 failures in 1 hour. So if the primary node died, it would fail over, and then if something happened to that secondary, it would fail back once we'd fixed the primary. We don't want it anymore because we don't want it constantly ping-ponging between 2. If it's doing that, something else is happening. We need to go and fix it. But 2 in 1 hour is what we went for.
Would there ever be any need for a tertiary node?
3 nodes? Yeah, absolutely. So it all depends on the environment. With that, you then need to work out your quorum settings because you've got 3 nodes there. So you, off the top of my head, you would need a file share witness. Double check. Go and have a look at the. There's a whole bunch of recommendations for quorum and availability groups. But yes, very valid scenario having 3 nodes, 5 nodes, all that jazz. Yeah. I just say 2 nodes because that's just the standard default we had in my last place. But yeah, there's completely valid design. You just need to make sure that all the nodes are voting and quorum can be sorted out when one of those dies. So it was something that popped up through our testing. And we were testing in our staging environment. And of course, I was looking at it going, oh, where's that? And then we went and saw the setting. And then I was like, oh, God, I don't think we've changed that for all of our production clusters. Let's go. So people say, oh, do I need to run chaos engineering in my production environment? No. If you go straight in and just start causing outages, you're going to be walked out that front door pretty quickly. If you are testing in lower environments, but if you are testing in your lower environments, make sure that infrastructure matches what you have in production. Now, you're not going to get probably the size of databases or the throughput in a lower environment, but you can still match up the infrastructure. If you've got AGs in production, have AGs in your staging environment and run tests through that way. Use tools to generate traffic. And there's loads of stuff out there like HammerDB that you can use.
Yeah, I've used a few of them.
Yep, yeah. To push transactions through your database and run your tests whilst you're generating load. So loads of stuff you can do. But all we're doing here is designing tests to make sure that the solutions and strategies we've put in place will work when we really need them. Nothing worse than, say, building a DR strategy and then not testing it for 6 months. And all of a sudden, that call comes through at 2:00 in the morning on a Sunday. You have to press that big red button and you're sitting there going, oh, I don't know if this is actually going to work. There's nothing worse than having to triage a failed DR strategy implementation. You have to work out, you're in a horrible situation where half your stuff has moved over and half the stuff isn't working. You have to go through and pull out why. That's not where you want to be. You want to have a DR strategy in place and you want to have regular testing with it.
Do you ever use a partner service to kind of run those disaster recovery tests or the chaos engineering principles?
No, I've always done them myself.
You do it all yourself.
Yeah, if I'm responsible for those VMs, instances, whatever, then I'm the one running the tests. I'm the one in control of. If I'm the one who's getting the call when things go down, I'm the one in complete control of that whole path.
Well, yeah, you need to know it inside out.
Yeah, I don't want to be the. If someone calls me and says my SQL instances have gone down, then I don't want to have to call someone else to enact something that I need to bring my instances back up.
Very fair point.
I'd always be, and so I work obviously with Everpure, and we have a load of HA and DR solutions on the arrays themselves that can help with things like SQL Server disaster recovery and high availability. But one thing I always talk with the DBAs is okay, if you bring it down into that storage layer, do you have access when you need it to be able to enact these? If you're happy handing it off to your storage admins, wonderful stuff. But again, test this, run through those scenarios, make sure that when something happens, that it can easily be enacted and brought up, and and you need to work out who's responsible for what.
Yeah,
there's nothing
definitely.
Like, my SQL instance has gone down. I've got a call about it. I've been paged about it, but I need to ring someone else and then answering. No, that's not where you want to be at all.
Yeah, documentation and strategy over who to call and when and in what situations and what to expect is just as important as putting the actual disaster recovery in place in the first place.
There's that scenario of I ask people, okay, who here who has ever been or ever worked with someone who installed the system, maintains the system, is responsible for triaging and fixing that system. They are the one source of knowledge for that entire system. It inevitably, everyone,
Yeah,
people put their
happens all
hands
the
up.
time.
Now, what happens? Take that person out of the room. It's called the hit by the bus scenario. The nicer way of putting it would be they've gone on holiday scenario.
For a very long time.
Yeah, they're not available. Do the rest of the team have the knowledge to fix that system if it's broken? If they don't have the knowledge, do they have the ability to access that knowledge in the form of, say, internal wikis, run books, whatever, as long as there's something there? It's a really good test to run through with your team.
Yeah.
It's really good fun. Like I said, get engineers in a room and get them starting to think about how the systems are going to fail and how they can test it. It's really good fun to get people down. Right, how are the systems going to blow up? Come on, let's think about this, and then you can design experiments around that. And just to reinforce, I'm not talking about immediately deploying into production. I'm talking about running through tests in a lower environment and then applying them to your production environment. We're not here to cause outages. If I go to my boss and say, we're going to start experiencing more outages now because I am an engineer of chaos. No, we're going to be, as I said, walked out the front door pretty quick.
That's a really, really good tip for people. Well, thanks for that. I mean, you've definitely given me a much wider view into what chaos engineering provides to the business and why it's important. I've tried it a couple of times in the past, but I mentioned partners because when I've done it in the past, it's always been partners or insurers that have asked us to do it as part of our insurance policies and things like that. So yeah, just to kind of prove things are secure,
highly available, and recoverable.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, I think that's us. We've gone through everything. Everything we plan to do. I mean, look, thank you so much for taking the time to join me and sharing your experience with the SQL Squared community. I'm sure people will be able to take so much away from this.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been great fun.
And a massive thank you to you all for tuning in and welcoming us back in 2026. We really appreciate you spending your time with us. Remember, if you enjoyed today's episode, please make sure you subscribe on your favorite podcast platform and leave us a review. I love hearing from you. So please fire over any questions you may have, or maybe any of your own data horror stories for me to have a good chuckle at. And if there's any that's relating to Andrew, I'll pass them over too. Remember to email mailbag@sqlsquared.co.uk for those emails to get in touch. Head over to sqlsquared.co.uk, the website, or into the video description for show notes, links to Andrew's work, other things that we've mentioned throughout the podcast. But until next time, keep your queries optimized, your backups tested, and see you in the next one. Cheers, Andrew. Thank you.